This is a special podcast presentation from 700WLW.com. This is Doc Thompson On Demand.
Sunday would have been Ronald Reagan's 100th birthday. October of 1964, he gave a speech called A Time for Choosing. And in the speech, he laid out what had become of America since all of the entitlements had been put in place. Where America had gone from roughly the 30s to 1964. It's amazing when you listen to this speech, and by the way, I'll put it at my blog, 700WLW.com, keyword doc, brought to you by the American Trading Company. You can listen to it for yourself. It's one of the greatest speeches in American history. He's passionate, and he makes a great argument when it comes to entitlement programs. He says, if these things really are to help the poor, and I'm paraphrasing here, shouldn't they tell us the score once in a while? Shouldn't they tell us of their successes, how there are fewer and fewer people in need of entitlements? Shouldn't they tell us their successes? That fewer and fewer people need these entitlements because they have worked, because they have helped people. That shows the flaw right there. And I'd say the same thing when it comes to school funding. Shouldn't they tell us the score once in a while? So let's find out the score with school funding. Let's see how we've done over the past 30, 40 years or so. Neil McCluskey joins me now from the Cato Institute Center for Educational Freedom. He's also the author of Feds in the Classroom. How are you, Neil?
Great. How are you?
Doing fine. I want to get the score. Let's find out how the feds have done. We've funded education. The feds has continued to spend more and more money. How much money have we increased over the past few decades?
I guess if you wanted to give a score, you'd say something like total bill for education, $1 billion or $100 billion, education zero. The fact of the matter is we have, in a real basis, so inflation adjusted over the last roughly 40 years, we've almost tripled per pupil expenditures, the amount we spend per kid. And the scores are absolutely flat. If you look at the National Assessment for Educational Progress for 17-year-olds from the early 1970s to today, almost completely stagnant. So we have spent a mammoth amount of money and gotten nothing for it.
See, that can't be, Neil, because all of the people who back education, whether it's the unions, many of the teachers, most of the administrators, school districts all over America keep telling me how they need more money.
Yeah, this is one of it's propaganda. You know, if you hear the same thing over and over again, people will believe it. And that's what we have. The constant drilling into our heads that our schools are somehow, getting by with one piece of chalk and maybe a ball to play kickball at recess, and that's it. It's ridiculous. If you look at what we spend, first of all, we spend more than almost any other developed nation per pupil. And it's gone up at huge rates with zero improvement. And this is so critical, zero improvement in academic outcomes. We are awash in money. Taxpayers have been bled dry by education or by education spending, but we haven't gotten actually any educational improvements as a result of this money.
So huge amounts of money have been spent. For 30, 40, whatever years, huge amounts of money, continuing to increase the spending. I mean, just year after year, decade, it needs to go up. We keep upping the ante. And yet kids are not learning more, and that is evident based on the amount they know compared with, the rest of the world. And second of all, graduation rates, and third, test scores.
Right. So if you look at the best estimate we have, at least what most people in education will acknowledge is a reasonable guide to how they're doing, is this National Assessment of Educational Progress, which is a federal test, but there's no money attached to it. So whether you do well, you do poorly, you don't get punished. And that's critical because that means there's no incentive to game these tests, the way we've seen with tests that apply to No Child Left Behind. So these are the best barometer we have, and there's been zero movement. If you look at international comparisons, most of them aren't nearly as old as NAEP, but since the middle 1980s, as far back as they go, we're usually in the middle of the pack, and we've made no progress, and we've actually, in some of them, dipped a little. Again, and that's with massive increases in funding.
What does Neil? And I'm being serious here. What does the Federal Department of Education do?
Well, basically, what they do is they take money from taxpayers. They pay people at the Department of Education pretty decent salaries to then redistribute that money and then return it to states and school districts with a lot of strings attached. And it's not like this redistribution is even, you might be able to say, well, it's taking from the rich and giving to the poor so the poor have better education and equal resources. It doesn't even come close to doing that anymore. At the beginning, you might have said, well, that was the focus. But over time, the focus has pretty much been, as with all federal spending, to get as much to every district as you can so every congressman can say, look at what I've done for my district. And so we just have this apparatus that pays itself a lot of money, burns up taxpayer money just to give it back to taxpayers so politicians can say, look at all the great things we've done for you.
The way I understand it is they simply, aside from spending the money and paying people and continuing to grow, as far as accomplishing anything, it seems just like they put some mandates out there, whether they get congressional approval on some things or whatever, that just make things more difficult, more red tape, more trouble.
Absolutely. That's all the strings that are attached. Now, for what it's worth, when 40 years ago, when the federal government started really getting involved in education, what they were doing was mainly really just throwing money at the problem. Already that started to build the bureaucracy, though, because states suddenly had to hire a whole bunch of people in their state departments of education to administer the money. The federal government hired more and more people to get the money to those states. But for a long time, they were just sending money. It was really in the 1980s, 90s, and especially with the No Child Left Behind Act, and it's starting in 2002, that the federal government said, now we're going to give you this money, but you also have to have you have to have state standards, you have to have tests, you're going to have to meet all these requirements. And the amazing thing is they added then all this red tape, but there's been no improvement in education because it's all been just basically telling bureaucrats, go through all these motions, but you still don't have to do anything to actually improve education. You just have to check all these blocks, and meanwhile you can set low standards, you can write easy tests, whatever you want to do, but you have to look like you're trying to improve education.
Boy, I'll tell you what, if that isn't a model for a lot of stuff we go through, the idea where as long as you have the appearance that things are good, then you're good, as opposed to actually doing things.
Right. Now, I should say that there are two, I think, motivations behind this. One is there's no question that a lot of this is driven by the self-interest of adults. The teachers' unions, who are by far the most powerful, politically powerful group in education and potentially just in all of American politics, the Administrators Association, the School Boards Associations, they all want more money for themselves. There are lots of people, though, who just assume that if the federal government or the state government or local government spends more on education, it will actually lead to more learning and that it's good for kids. And what kind of hard-hearted, horrible person would be against spending more because it's good for kids? They don't realize that all this does is enrich the adults, the people who are hired by the schools or the universities, not the people they're supposed to be educating. And the reason that happens is the people who are supposed to be educating don't have any real power. The only way they get real power is if you give them the money and you let them say, I'm going to go to the school that I want, not the one that gets my taxpayer dollars no matter what.
Well, that's a famous quote by the head of the teachers union, the one you said, I'll start caring about children when they start paying dues, union dues. Is that
right,
pretty
well,
much
that's supposed to be Al Schenker, the one-time president of the AFT. Now, I've tried to find that quote, and I'm not sure he actually said it, but
it's certainly the attitude, though.
The reality.
Yeah. Could we do away with the Federal Department of Education? Could we just lop that off?
Absolutely. Now, what I would say is we often target the Department of Education, which needs to go. The Constitution gives the federal government no authority to be involved in education. It won't do us any good, though, if we just take the programs that the department administers and we move it to other bureaucracies in the federal government, as some people want. It's those programs that have to go away. We have to get rid of things like, even though it sounds terrible, Title I, which is $14 billion, which is supposed to be money targeted to the poor, but that has never been shown to do poor students any good, but it does make teachers' unions, administrators' associations rich. Get rid of things like that. Get rid of, again, it sounds mean, but you get rid of this federal student aid for colleges, the Pell Grants, the student loans, because all those have done is they've enabled colleges to raise their prices at ridiculous rates so they can capture all that aid, and students aren't any better off. So we have to stop feeling about education policy. It doesn't make us feel good, and we have to start thinking about it and think, does it actually do any good?
Am I right that it really needs to be done at the state and local level?
Well, sort of. It's certainly better when states and local governments run their own education system because there is, of course, competition, especially at the local level, but even states trying to bring in more business, things like that. And competition is key to try and to force improvements in effectiveness and efficiency. But these are still governments, so the ability to get them to change, it's very hard. It's almost impossible in many cases to get meaningful change. So what really needs to happen is money is given to parents, education money. Then suddenly they have the same power as customers, when you're buying a car, when you're buying a computer. Then the educators have to respond to the demand of the people they're supposed to serve, not just go say, well, I don't really want to work hard. I'll just go lobby to make sure that I get lots of money and there's no accountability for what I do. So we have to go beyond thinking that government at any level should run education and say the way to make education work is force the educators to respond to the people they're supposed to be serving, the parents and the students.
Is school choice a big part of the fix with this?
Yeah, I think it's absolutely crucial. And I spent a lot of time fighting against national standards for education. There's an effort right now to essentially have the federal government tell every state and every school district what standards they'll use, what their tests have to be based on. And I argue against that, and people say, well, what do you want to leave the states and the school districts in charge? They've done a terrible job.
Yeah,
and those people are right. They're absolutely right. They've done a terrible job. But what they won't acknowledge is that that's because you have government in charge at each level. And government's going to respond to the people who are the most politically motivated. And, of course, that's going to be the people employed by the schools whose livelihoods come from it, and they want what everybody wants, which is to get paid as much as possible and not have anyone hold them accountable. That's why they need to respond to consumers.
It's like if I put you in a straitjacket and said, hey, or play basketball, and then said, well, we can't put Neil in charge. He's done a horrible job playing basketball. Look, he can't do a thing. They set the standards, and then they say, well, the local governments have done such a poor job, or states have done such a poor job. Well, that's because they were dealing with all the bureaucracy at the federal level for so long.
I think it's even worse than that. What they do is they put every parent in America in a straitjacket, and then when the schools, they say that the parents shouldn't get to choose, when the schools that are a government monopoly do badly, then they say, well, we couldn't leave parents in charge because parents haven't done anything so far. And it's because parents don't have any power. They don't have any control over the money, and so they can complain all they want to the schools that are doing an awful job, and the people who run the schools say, thank you for sharing that with us. You can go away now because you don't decide whether or not we get paid. So it's really parents who've been in the straitjackets, and we have got to let them out.
Neil McCluskey from the Cato Institute Center for Educational Freedom. I appreciate you joining me, sir.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much. Got a link at 700WLW.com, brought to you by the American Trading Company. I think it's time we finally put the schools on a zero-tolerance policy. It's time parents start saying, schools, you are on the zero-tolerance policy. We're no longer going to tolerate all of the crazy agenda of you worrying about things like making sure a kid has disposed of his trash properly, worrying about all of these other agenda-driven things. You now are on a zero-tolerance policy. We are not going to tolerate failure. We don't care about this other garbage. We want you to teach the basics. Stop trying to teach our kids how they should live their lives. Stop trying to push your agenda on them. I get an email from somebody who claimed that Stacy Schuler, they sent me a link to a video that she was allegedly showing her kids that she's a crazy, whacked-out vegan, and as part of health class, She was showing them this agenda-driven video. I already have it at my blog, by the way. Go and read it yourself or view the video yourself. 700WLW.com. Really? What are you showing them vegan videos for? But that's complete agenda. We're tired of this stuff. You're on a zero-tolerance policy. We are no longer going to tolerate it. By the way, I'm going to talk with Scott Sloan this morning at about 11:06 on that and give you the latest on it. Coming up next, the hypocrisy of the food police on 700 WL. Fox 19 Storm Tracker forecast. We got some cloudy skies this afternoon, a few breaks, much colder and windy, high 22, partly cloudy skies tonight, very cold with an overnight low around 10. 22 now at the big one.
Well, now, if government planning and welfare had the answer, and they've had almost 30 years of it, shouldn't we expect government to read the score to us once in a while? Shouldn't they be telling us about the decline each year in the number of people needing help, the reduction in the need for public housing? But the reverse is true. Each year the need grows greater, the program grows greater. We were told 4 years ago that 17 million people went to bed hungry each night. Well, that was probably true. They were all on a diet.
No, that's the whole point. If these programs are so wonderful, if entitlement programs and welfare and everything else work so well, why do more people want on it? Why do the numbers grow? How come people don't get off of those things? Mike Dayton, you're on 700 WLW.
Morning, Doc.
Morning, sir.
I think the blame needs to be spread equally. And the reason I say that is I've long been of the opinion that my own number I put out there is 90% of society's ills are have a root cause in poor parenting, lack of responsibility, lack of initiative. You know, when kids come to school completely unprepared to be at school, both in their socialization skills and what they, baseline of knowledge that they have, you can't expect a teacher with a kid who is hyper, who doesn't know anything, and you put a room full of kids like that in there, you just can't expect miracles. And then, you throw in what the government, just like the last little clip there that you played, what the government does to correct problems. And, I don't want to say it hamstrings parents, but what I think it does is it continues to aid poor parenting.
I'd say you're right on some of that. I'd say absolutely right. I mean, parents a lot of times do not do the right thing. The problem, Mike, is when I mentioned Stacy Schuler. If she was showing the kids a stupid vegan video, that's agenda driven. That's all it is. And as a parent, now wait a minute. And as a parent, even if you're very involved with the kids' curriculum, should you have to sit in a class every day with your child to know everything a teacher says and does? I'll share this information with you at 11:06. But they were claiming she was saying inappropriate things, even telling the kids about her divorce and whatever else. If that's true, that's outrageous. And you wouldn't expect as a parent that these things would happen. You expect that there are systems in place, that a principal would say, some things going on in the classroom there, that they would oversee this curriculum in each one of the classrooms. There's supposed to be systems in place so parents don't have to sit there during every class or record every class. How do you know the little things that are being slipped in there? We don't. That's part of the frustration. So yes, parents are responsible, absolutely. But I don't fault them for not knowing what's going on every second in every classroom. We have an expectation that I don't think is outrageous, an expectation that they would teach the basics. We all have things we have to do. We have to go to work. We have to pay the bills. We've got all this stuff to do. And certainly being involved with your kids and knowing what they're learning is important. But every second of every day when they're sliding in these crazy videos or randomly talking about their divorce, that is no business in the classroom. All right, we're going to find out about the hypocrisy of the food police coming up next. Michelle Obama took part in the president's Super Bowl party. Guess what was on the menu? Well, it wasn't healthy things. It's Doc Thompson, 700 WLW.
She's a vegetarian. Mary Lou, Mary Lou, Mary Lou will but sure like the bone.
Doc Thompson on 700 WLW. I don't know if she's really a vegan or not. I'm just telling you what was shared with me. Go watch the video for yourself, the one that was allegedly shown in Stacy Schuster's class. Just go there, 700WLW.com. It's right up there, and then we'll discuss it at greater length in the 11 o'clock hour when Scott Sloan joins me with the latest in the whole Mason teacher situation. You want to be a vegan? Your choice. You want to eat fatty food? Should be your choice. Don't come to me regardless of the outcome. If you're healthy, if you're not healthy, if it costs you your life, your family, your friends, or anything else, don't come crying to me. I'm going to defend your rights to eat what you want, make mistakes, eat bad food, good food, or anything else. Just don't come to me with the consequences. You make the choice, you live with the consequences. And certainly, don't try brainwashing my kid. I don't want you brainwashing me or trying to, and I don't want you try to brainwash my kid because it's not going to happen. It's just going to cause me a lot of extra work and stress. It's not the job of the school. It's not the job of the president or the first lady either.